As a Boise State Public Radio listener, we're inviting you to share your opinions about technology in our annual survey about how you use the radio, social media, smartphones, tablets, streaming, and the web to stay connected. We hope you'll find it to be an interesting way to reflect on your own changing habits. Please take a few moments to participate, and thanks for helping Boise State Public Radio plan for the future. Take the survey now at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. How a city writes their zoning codes can make a huge influence on how much housing is available in a community. And the Gem State Housing Alliance took a deep dive into how those codes are affecting 28 communities in 6 regions across Idaho. It's their new Idaho statewide zoning code analysis. Ali Rabi was once the executive director for Jesse Tree. She has also served in the Idaho State Senate, and she is now the executive director of the Gem State Housing Alliance. And she sat down with our George Prentice to break down that new report. So let's take a listen.
Housing costs, well, we do know that they continue to outpace wages across Idaho. And well, let me ask this up top. I have read that Idaho is one of the least affordable housing markets in the nation. Is that fair to say?
The National Association of Realtors has granted us the privilege, unfortunate privilege of being the second least affordable market in the United States after Montana. That's when you compare the cost of housing to wages and just what people are having to contribute toward their housing. So we are considered a very unaffordable market. And what has driven that is simply that demand has outpaced our supply, as we are the fastest growing state in the nation and have been over the last few years. We just can't keep up with that demand.
But your analysis here says this is fixable.
We believe it is. So cities and states across the country are really taking another look at how they're building their cities. Strong Towns is a great resource in terms of the guidance they're providing to cities. And I think cities across the nation, as well as some states, are looking at, okay, we need to fix our zoning codes. And cities that have changed their zoning codes in Idaho or in other states have seen a huge boon in development, especially the types of housing that we don't normally see get built. Most of our zoning codes across the country were written in the 1950s and Idaho in the 1970s. And they haven't significantly been updated since then, some of them. And those older codes primarily favor larger lot, single family development that favors larger suburban developments on our urban fringe. And now that we have grown so quickly as a state, and our cities are, some of them are kind of built out, more of our development opportunities are on existing infrastructure, infill, and they are going to be homes that would be smaller, but those homes are a lot harder to build with codes that have not been updated.
I want to ask a little bit about duplexes and triplexes, because I think more than a few people point to them as possible solutions, but your analysis reveals that yes, they may be allowed, but they do usually require conditional use permits or rezonings.
Yep. Duplexes, triplexes, up to sixplexes. These were typical homes that were built prior to the implementation of zoning codes. If you walk in some of Idaho's most historic neighborhoods, you will see them, but they're not allowed to get built by right in many Idaho cities. And so they have to go through maybe, requests for variance or a conditional use permit process, which is very unpredictable and creates additional delays and costs for developers. And sometimes after tens of thousands of dollars have been put in, they could get rejected. And so developers are much less likely to build anything that requires a conditional use permit. And so we just don't see those housing types get built where they're not allowed by right. So those are just one type of, smaller housing, but there's all kinds of different, more creative ways that housing can be built as well that are just harder to build under some of our older codes.
We have to talk about parking minimums are usually baked into a lot of projects.
Yes. There are so many books on parking and some jokes in pro housing groups where people talk about how we like cars more than we like people. Yeah, we tend to build a lot of parking lots, and some of our older codes do require additional parking, even for smaller homes or ADUs where that parking may not be needed. Parking does add a significant cost to a development. That cost gets passed directly to consumers. And yeah, sometimes these extra parking requirements, they're not really needed, especially in certain parts of cities that might have excess street parking or be on transit corridors. Some households don't need 3 cars. So,
Yeah.
so especially if they're living in a duplex or an ADU. So we do find that some parking requirements could stand to be updated in different codes. Some cities have done this well, but again, some are still needing to work through those changes in Idaho.
Can you give us an example of that? Because I'm assuming that some requirements have, well, I'm not certain. What are like two spaces on the
Yep.
street,
So
right? And you're saying they could be lowered or reconsidered at least?
yeah, especially for smaller housing types, those are going to be smaller households and maybe even just single person households. But most duplex requirements for parking, for example, require 2 off-street parking spaces per unit. Some also require guest parking. And so for a duplex, that's going to be 2 for one side of the duplex, 2 for the other side, 4 total parking spots. And what research has shown from other cities that's kind of in excess of what is needed. Of course, there are going to be extreme examples where there's situations where too many people are living in a unit, but you can sort through those challenges in other ways rather than imposing excess parking requirements on everybody.
One of the suggestions in this analysis is to remove, well, bans on smaller homes. What's the problem with smaller homes where communities are banning them?
So the main ban is related to a minimum lot size. And so if you have a minimum lot size that's even 4,000 square feet, which is pretty typical for Idaho cities, some cities have increased that to even larger in recent years. That's going to prevent anybody from building a smaller home on that lot. So if you have, 4,000 square foot lot, that inherently is somebody, we live in a capitalist society. They're going to build a larger home that allows them to cover the cost of the land that they purchased. Land is very expensive. So minimum lot size is definitely a barrier. Another way that smaller homes are banned is just by different dimensional standards. So setbacks is the most common standard that prevents smaller homes from getting built. Sometimes the setbacks are even up to 20, 30 feet from a street or even on the side. And that can prevent, a smaller home from getting built, even if it is, kind of a smaller lot. Other dimensional standards like width requirements or depth requirements, kind of similarly to the lot size minimum, prevents things from getting built. So a lot of different ways just with dimensional standards that kind of prevent, especially infill, from getting built. With infill, these lots are usually kind of uniquely sized and shaped, and folks that own that land might want to build 2 or 3 duplexes with an ADU that has a garage attached to it. But because of the different dimensional requirements or because of the minimum lot size requirements, they're not able to do that. And so as a result, we just get less housing built, which further constrains our supply.
Aren't more families, especially new homeowners, looking for that first home? And more often than not, it could be a smaller home that makes it more affordable or more accessible. I would think that there would be an appetite for more smaller homes.
I think it's kind of common sense, right? That smaller homes are less expensive. We all know that bigger homes are more expensive. And
especially that first home.
That first home. And we don't have as many of those first homes anymore. Because of our codes, there's some really great kind of diagrams that show this, but we don't really have that stair-step system of leading into homeownership anymore across the nation. We have our apartments, and people are paying too much towards their rent, because a lot of people are also stuck in the rental market and they can't get into their first home. And then we have our, average home cost, which is $500,000 now, even more with you look at the interest rates. And so the average family is really struggling to get onto that first step out of the rental market. We don't have as many products that are $200,000 or $300,000 products anymore. And in Idaho, in part because, our growth, but in order to get those types of products, the homes have got to be smaller. And those small homes are just really hard to build.
Yeah. One of the suggestions seems obvious on its face, and that is to build homes near jobs. Why are we not doing that?
Our position is that commercial zones are overzoned, and technically many of those zones are very strict. It's got to be commercial. Some cities are definitely stepping up and doing a really good job at creating more mixed use districts that do allow for housing and commercial to be next to each other. But there are many zones across Idaho where commercial is very strict. And so developers are not going to, again, go through those extra processes, hire an attorney, request variances, or whatever it is to build housing in that zone. They're just going to do what is predictable. And so we don't get a lot of housing built in many of our commercial zones, and there is excess land in those zones. And we're just encouraging folks to look at opportunities for kind of rezoning where it makes sense, those commercial zones to allow for more housing, to get built near potential jobs, their jobs, which reduces strain on our traffic and our infrastructure. Mixed use is just a great way to build for so many reasons. And it is hard to do in a lot of our zones. American Enterprise Institute has done some great research on this if people are interested in looking at that more, but they have found a ton of excess land and infill opportunities in Idaho in those commercial zones.
Talk to me about the Alliance. Tell me what you're doing on a daily basis.
So we started this group last year we got a grant opportunity, but the grant opportunity spurred out of the fact that a lot of us that were working in this space or for nonprofits with people that were struggling to pay their rent or even ending up homeless for the first time, local Idahoans, our workforce that can't afford to live here in Idaho anymore due to the fact our housing costs has increased by 40% in recent years. We just were feeling like we were just responding to the crisis, one by one of all these people that need our help. But there wasn't one group that was really focused on bringing everyone together around policy solutions for high housing costs. How do we, I believe it's a somewhat, a policy choice that we make, and we can change the choices that we're making and come up with creative solutions together to try to get to a place where locals can afford to live here again. And so our goal is to kind of bring everyone around to solutions. We do believe that it's fixable. Other cities, other states have done it and demonstrated what works. So there are definitely things that we can learn from that have are evidence-based. And we're excited to just share what we believe those solutions are. We have a policy agenda. We're basically meeting with policymakers at every level of government who are interested in improving their housing policies. We're also engaging with the public because one big challenge for Idaho is, as we have grown, anti-growth mindsets. And so just trying to bring the general public around to, look, we're going to keep growing. Here's how we can grow together in a way that serves locals, and just try to have those conversations. Also just activate more pro-housing voices around, engaging in going to a public hearing or talking to their elected official about housing, because elected officials across the state have told us that more anti-housing voices are more active. So those are our goals, kind of just advocacy with our electeds, public education, trying to talk about this wherever we can, in every forum in Idaho.
Where do you think your greatest chance of success might be at a city hall level or at the state house? So where, if you only had so many resources to dedicate, where's your best opportunity to move the needle on this?
I'm really excited to be working on the issue of housing policy because it's a cross-partisan, nonpartisan issue right now. We're seeing similar
But
policies
policy at
pass.
a state level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And across the country, in cities and states are taking action on housing, no
Mhm.
matter if they're red or blue. People are coming together from both sides of the aisle to get things done. And so I do think that, at the city levels, there's a lot of motivation of, we have a bunch of new mayors. I think 29 new mayors in Idaho that
Yeah.
I've counted.
Mhm.
A lot of new council members. They do care about this issue because they hear about it in their communities. Whether it's their sister-in-law that can't afford a rental or their, kid that's still at home at 25 because they can't afford to get out of their house.
Mhm.
So everyone's really motivated to tackle this issue. At the city level, there's a lot of opportunities to update comprehensive plans, zoning codes, leverage vacant land, and then, a lot of need to just at the very local level, educate the public about this topic again. At the state level, I think there's opportunities as well. Idaho did just pass a lot of legislation on housing in the last session. We plan to be active in the 2027 session to try to get some additional positive changes made. So I feel hopeful. I think county commissioners are talking about it, because they're dealing with these challenges in cities' areas of impact. Yeah, I think I've heard motivation from people at all levels of government in Idaho, and housing reform is sweeping the nation again at every level of government, red and blue states.
If there were a litmus test question to ask anyone running for office on this issue, what would that question be? In other words, if we could ask a question to compare candidate A to candidate B on the fact that we have become one of the least affordable markets in the nation, what question should we ask?
George, you always have the best
No.
questions. And so I think what is coming to mind first is, do you think we need more housing options for Idahoans? Because we do hear from some candidates who are anti-growth and want to push back on and maybe stop growth, put a complete moratorium on it.
Mhm.
And all that does is restrict housing supply and increase housing costs for everybody and push out our locals and our young people from Idaho. So I think ultimately it's a supply challenge. We need supply of all types and sizes, and there are a lot of different ways to get more supply. And again, a no silver bullet solution. Zoning is one of the opportunities, but there are so many others as well. But I think just asking people, do you think we need more housing for locals is a great question to ask.
Do you think we need more housing for locals?
Yeah.
And then ask them to be as specific as possible.
Yes. And if they know what missing middle housing is, which is what we're talking about a lot, even better. Because a lot of people don't know what that is. Again, this is a new problem for Idaho. We fastest growing state. We've all experienced it. We see it all over the place. And it's hard for some people when I say, hey, Idaho's grown really fast. We have built a lot of housing, but it's not enough. But that's the fact. And unfortunately, I'm from here. I grew up in a town, Middleton, surrounded by farm fields. Those farm fields are now large lot suburban neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I think for any of us that have grown up here or lived here a long time, we've seen the growth. We know it's inevitable. So the question moving forward is how do we grow? In a way that serves locals. One solution that we're proposing is let's build more homes for our workforce. And that looks like allowing homes to be smaller, different types and sizes. I don't say density because that is kind of a bad term for people. But what it's really about is creating more homes of different shapes and sizes that meet different families' needs and at different price points.
Say that one more time. Creating more homes of different
Different
shapes
types, shapes and sizes that meet different families' needs and budgets.
That was our George Prentice and Ali Rabi, Executive Director of the Gem State Housing Alliance, with a breakdown of the group's new Idaho statewide zoning code analysis. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Make sure you check out our podcast feed because you can find more episodes of topics that might be interesting to you. And for more local news and headlines, make sure you subscribe to the Connector podcast. Know someone who might enjoy our podcast? Be sure to share it with them today.
Love Boise State Public Radio podcasts? They are free to enjoy, but not free to produce. If you can give, your support helps keep shows like Idaho Matters and Scandalize available to everyone. Donate now at boisestatepublicradio.org.